Hey guys, welcome back to another video. As you can see by the title and probably the thumbnail, Dawah responded to one of my videos on TikTok and Instagram, I believe. And it was specifically a video where I was responding to him discussing why men and women can't be friends. Now, I think he really misunderstood my position, and I think he feels like I misunderstand his position, so I'm going to go into this being completely good faith, because within his video, he granted me at least some grace, although I don't think he was being entirely good faith and trying to evaluate things from an impartial perspective. But nonetheless, he was being incredibly graceful in comparison to other kinds of videos that he's filmed. So I'm going to do my best to extend that grace back. And before we get into the video, we're going to go over the video that he posted initially that I responded to. And then we're going to go over the video response that he made to my video. I'm not going to be showing my face in this video. You're just going to see a little profile picture. Or maybe I'll make a cartoon image of me. I don't know. But I just did this for the sake of I feel like I'm far better articulated when I don't have to worry about how I look or putting myself on camera and so forth. And also I have a lot to show you on screen here, and I'm going to organize it better for you guys throughout the video, but I need to be able to look at the articles while I'm explaining these things to you guys. But let's begin first and foremost with the video that he posted.
Men and women cannot be friends. Even they cannot be friends. Men and women cannot be friends. Look, forget me. Let me tell you something. Okay, no problem. Let me tell you something. Are you guys friends? Simple question. Do you guys find her attractive?
Yes, but not
No. Do you find her attractive? Yes or no?
Yes.
Do you find her attractive? Yes or no?
Yeah.
Okay. If you find her attractive as a man, would you not want to be intimate with an attractive woman?
No, because it's my friend. Not necessarily.
Let me just get this right. I find a woman attractive, but I don't want to be with her. Can you logically, as a man, tell me how that makes sense? Sister, one second.
We know each other for maybe 12 years.
It doesn't matter if you know for 20 years. If you find her attractive, you don't find her attractive.
Yeah, but I don't want to be
my friend,
more than friends.
Look, if you said to me, she's not my type, I'll say, okay, understandable. If you said she's not my type, understandable. But you're saying, I find her attractive. If a man finds a woman attractive, he wants to be with her. How could you find someone attractive and not want to have sex?
If I find them attractive, doesn't mean that I want to have intimacy.
Okay. One second, sister. The way you are biologically programmed is different. You're thinking from an emotional perspective. They are men. The way we work with our sexual drive, look at statistics and shows. A man's sex drive is completely different to a woman's.
Okay, so there's a lot of issues with this video, and before we get into reacting to his video, I want to fully articulate my position for you guys so you can understand where I particularly didn't like things. And before I get into that, I just want to highlight something that I find ironic, is he mentioned in his response video to me on YouTube that, I was responding to him giving dawah to 3 young people. Brother, you're visibly making them uncomfortable with the comments that you are espousing. The way that you are articulating it and the ideas that you are propagating is visibly making them uncomfortable. Not only the men, but especially the woman or the girl, I don't know how old she is. She did not like your comment about biology, and for good reason. And to demonstrate that I have some authority within speaking on this field, I am a double major, and one of those majors is biological sciences, and specifically I concentrated my classes on neuroscience. You are incorrect in constantly citing biology. And I don't want to get into the science because within my video, as you guys will see as we watch, my contention was not the science. Because if I wanted to refute you with science, I would have brought science, I would have brought studies. But studies are completely irrelevant when you are making a logical claim. You essentially make the claim within your video that by virtue of a man finding a woman attractive, that must mean that he wants to be sexually intimate with her. And that was my contention. And I feel like you didn't understand that, again, as we will see as we were watching his video, that my contention was something of some kind of logical inconsistency, not something pertaining to sciences or epistemology. But anyways, just to fully give you guys my perspective, he essentially commits a category error. He conflates concepts such as aesthetic appraisal, sexual desire, and intention to be the same things, or to imply the same things, and they don't. He essentially says, as I mentioned earlier, if you find her attractive, then you would want to be intimate. And if you don't want to be intimate, then that must be illogical. He doesn't necessarily say all these things bar for bar explicitly, but he implicitly implies it. However, my issue with this is that you are presupposing a hidden premise in which you define or you stipulate attractive to mean something sexually desired, at least within the context of this argument. And why this doesn't work, at least in respect of the people that you're speaking to and as well as your audience, is most people don't understand attractive to imply sexually desired. You're not providing a stipulative definition, so they don't understand what you're saying, and neither do I understand what you're saying. That's why I feel like it's logically inconsistent. The term attractive is ambiguous. It can refer to something that is aesthetically pleasing, like visual harmony, right? Looking at features on someone's face and they're harmonious. Attractive can also refer to something romantically appealing. It can refer to something sexually desired, or it can refer to something socially admirable. So the logical fallacy that Ali Dawah is committing here is equivocation. The way in which you use the term attractive is implying multiple senses, but then you imply it has some kind of one necessary implication. And what I found interesting is in your response to me on YouTube, you start to shift the definition and give it more leeway. Whereas in this particular video, this Instagram video, you did not provide leeway. And so basically what I mentioned in the video to demonstrate this logical inconsistency is that if it is the case that attraction necessarily implies something sexually desired, then it must be the case that if you call one of your family members attractive, that you are sexually desiring a family member. And that's absurd. So that reductio I provided, although it was informal, was to demonstrate that the word attractive has polysemy. It has multiple meanings. It's not constrained to this idea of sexual attraction. And furthermore, when I brought up this concept of you essentially normalizing mental infidelity by saying, all men think this way, and it's not possible for a man to separate a woman who's conventionally attractive from sexual desire. When I brought this up, it was not to slander you or to kind of poison the well about your character. I don't know who you are, I don't know what you think, I don't know what your relationship with your wife is, I don't keep up with you like that. And quite frankly, I will never know you to that degree and I will never make such presumptions. However, based on the logic that you were presupposing, it is the case that you would be committing mental infidelity. But regardless, I'm not going to get into the rest of my position. I just kind of wanted to summarize that for the people who haven't watched my video yet, so they can kind of get an idea of what I'm arguing here and see where he kind of missed the mark in his response. So let's get to watching his video.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, brothers and sisters and dear friends. This video is going to be very, very informative, and it's going to show you, subhanAllah, how sisters in general and females are so out of touch with male psychology, biology, the way we're created, how Allah's created us. And this sister, who's done many videos about me on multiple occasions, which I didn't really have the time to respond, I'll be honest with you, accusations, speculations, disrespect sometimes, and it's okay, she's my sister in Islam and I forgive her for those remarks. But
I want to pause here and I want to say this, that in the past you have been critiqued for your response to women and the fact that you oftentimes tend to be unkind. And that's oftentimes why I respond to you with a level of harshness. However, it's evident that you're obviously trying to do better and you've changed how you respond to people. And I'm gonna give you your flowers for that. Good job. And so because you gave me that same grace, I'm gonna extend that to you. And I'm gonna do my best to do so. But anyways, let's continue.
I want to stick to specifically the Quran, Sunnah, and I want to talk about research and studies, not for my own self, but let's stick to that research and studies, because very interestingly, she's reacting to me giving dawah to two non-Muslims, three non-Muslims, two are male and one's a female, and I'm talking about how men and women cannot be friends because of a variety of reasons. Now, she disagrees with me, but does she disagree with me based on evidence from Islam, based on evidence from the Quran and the Sunnah, based on evidence from studies and research? No. She disagrees with me because it's me.
No, Ali Dawah, I disagreed with you because not only is it harmful, it's untrue, and it's also illogical. And I really want you to see this. That's why I make so many videos in response to you. I want you to see that you make these certain conclusions that aren't necessarily certain within the sciences. And mind you, when I invoke certainty within this video, I'm going to refer to philosophical certainty. I'm not using certain in respect of referring to some kind of particular. But let's continue.
Let's watch for ourselves, inshallah, and dissect with evidences over evidences, ample amount of evidences, which absolutely, with all due respect, show the contrary, that men and women cannot be friends. And then I have a question for her. What is her disagreement with me? On what basis? Let's get to it, inshallah.
They're attractive.
Yes, but not like...
No. Do you find her attractive, yes or no?
Yes.
Do you find her attractive, yes or no?
Yeah.
Okay, if you find her attractive as a man, would you not want to be intimate with an attractive woman?
No.
Let me just get this right. I find a woman attractive, but I don't want to be with her. Can you logically, as a man, tell me how that makes sense?
Why people still watch this guy, I will never understand, but she wants a logical explanation, so I will provide.
Okay, good. Firstly, number one, she's saying, I do not know why people will listen to me. Okay, on what basis should they not listen to me? Are you going to bring evidence from the Quran, the Sunnah, Allah and His Messenger, studies, research? Or is it based on personal attacks of who I am? Or you have a disagreement of what? What is that I say?
Yes, I am going to give you evidences, not necessarily from the Quran and Hadith and so forth, just because I feel like they aren't relevant, because Islam doesn't make these explicit claims regarding male sexuality in the ways that you do. You kind of assume them. However, I will provide you with the logic and I'll provide you with the studies and my perspective. And the reason why I think that people should not watch you and should not listen to you is because I think you have not treated your platform with the level of caution or vigilance or prudence and foresight that a creator should have. You have not been careful with the kinds of things that you propagate, and that's not to say that you can't get anything wrong. That's not to say that you can't make mistakes. Things happen, right? We get things wrong. We're human. We're not perfect. But these are things that you tend to consistently do. Now, the dawah that you do can obviously be good, but it's not good when you respectfully make Muslims look bad sometimes. And it's because you're not familiar with certain topics or how to address them, again, with the vigilance that they deserve and the sensitivity that they deserve. And this has been going on for years, and I would assume that if you have people constantly telling you this, you would take heed to their advice and potentially try to improve the way in which you communicate and try to expand your knowledge and be good faith about the knowledge that you acquire or about the studies that you reference. That is why I think that people should not listen to you, not because I think you're a bad person. I don't know who you are as a person, and I don't think it's productive to reduce people to those kinds of labels. But I do think that the things that you espouse can indeed be harmful, yes.
Most of the times, it's not that you have an issue with myself. It's that there's issues with what Islam pertains to and what Islam says, and you know that if you have an issue with that, it can leave you in dangerous ground. So what you do, you throw Muslims, people in the dawah bros, like myself, under the bus at the pretense of your disagreement is with me. No, it's not. Your disagreement is with Allah and His Messenger and how He has created us.
No, Ali Dawah, it's not that I have issues with what Islam says. I have issues with what you attribute to Islam. You come to your own conclusions about things and why certain things were prescribed within Islam, and then you make it seem like it's ontologically true of Islam. So like, for example, you make this argument that men are allowed to have 4 wives because they're inherently more sexual, and I think this is a very problematic line of reasoning, and I'll demonstrate this later on because you brought it up. But this isn't explicitly stated anywhere within, primary sources like the Quran or like Hadith. Something was prescribed within religion, and you wanted to make sense of why was this thing prescribed. So you came to what you believe to be the most likely conclusion, although Islam does not explicitly prescribe the reason as to why this thing was ordained, and this remains the case for a lot of things within Islam. And sorry, just a bit of a side note, a lot of the things that I'm going to be discussing about my position regarding both polygamy and male hypersexuality, or the normalization of it, will also be within my Substack articles titled The Immorality of Modern Polygamy, where I go into how men are not intrinsically more polygamous, how polygamy has been incorrectly framed within religious spaces like within Islam, and especially amongst the men who follow Islam. And within my article, The Myth of Male Hypersexuality, I essentially demonstrate how it is illogical to come to the conclusion that men are inherently more sexual than women. And I break down one of the largest meta-analyses that most people tend to reference in this argument, and I demonstrate why it doesn't hold up, and then I bring in other studies that kind of counter it. But anyways, back to what I was saying about polygamy. I'll get into this more later, but nonetheless, it's not necessarily that I have an issue with polygamy in itself. I have an issue with the framing of it as something that is inherent or immutable to men, and that it's for male desire, because that's where you allow injustice to creep in when it comes to polygamy. And that's why statistically most women who are in polygamous marriages tend to suffer, because the men who enter these marriages only do it with their own desires in mind and not for the sake of Allah. But anyways, let's continue.
So let's get straight into what she has to say.
Dawah, your perspective and your conclusion is not logical. You are presupposing that recognizing that someone's conventionally attractive and being sexually attracted to them or having sexual intent are the same things, and they're not. And you're also assuming that because a man might be sexually attracted to a woman that he will go on to pursue that, and that he must, or else it's illogical. This is so hedonistic. Are we barbaric?
Okay, good. So she said, is this hedonistic and is this barbarian? You can already see she's given terminologies to certain things. Number one, you are not a man. You can't talk on that specific matter. Are you a man to be talking about? It's like me talking about childbirth. Do you know, guys, childbirth, if you think about it, it's not really that hard. Excuse me, with all due respect, did you give birth? No. Why are you talking on our behalf on something that we go through? I wouldn't talk about matters that I do not understand.
I don't need to be a man to speak on this. I don't need to be a man to understand it. Why? Because we have empirical evidence. We can utilize objective measurements to understand arousal. We don't need subjective reports, and you don't need to be a man. Adhering to subjective reports, as you'll see later on, is one of the weakest ways to understand arousal, and I also don't need to be a man to understand it. We have things such as penile plethysmography, and we have a respective measurement for women as well, and we have neuronal imaging, so we can look at things like fMRI scans to understand arousal-related brain activity, and we can also also analyze hormonal concentrations and levels, specifically by salivary assays and statistical tests to tell us, how much testosterone or cortisol or whatever hormone has risen in an individual during arousal. Like, this is so illogical. If I'm a doctor, do I need to have been a cancer patient or have cancer in the moment in order to understand cancer and how it affects the body and how it influences certain behaviors or health? No. And also, one final note on that. If you believe that I can't understand you as a man because I am not a man, then why are you citing research and studies? You either hold to the principle that evidence works across persons, or your argument is specifically forbidding you from using studies to educate women, because by your standard, women can't know male psychology and principle of being a woman.
So the here is you're giving it barbarism and hedonism. Why? Because we're talking about a man's psychology and physiology and the way he is created. Now, the question is, for example, let's go to studies. I don't want to talk out my just talking for the sake of it, inshallah. Okay, she's claiming that this is wrong. I'm going to ask a question. On what basis? Men and women cannot be friends. Why are you not a Muslim woman? As far as I know, you're a Muslim. Why are you trying to say they can be? Now, let's look at, for example, some studies. One study that shows.
So before we get into your studies, you ask me, how can I believe that men and women can be friends? There's a distinction between prescriptive statements or normative statements and descriptive statements. A prescriptive statement or normative statement that I can make, as well as that you are making, is that men and women ought to not be friends for reasons XYZ. A descriptive statement is me saying men and women can be friends. Why? Because descriptive statements observe and explain things as they are. Prescriptive approaches or normative conclusions dictate how things ought to be. So you're conflating what is the case with what ought to be the case. You're misunderstanding my position. If I was married, I would also believe it ought to be the case that me and my partner avoid having friends of the opposite sex, especially within certain contexts. But that doesn't mean I don't think it's possible to have friends of the opposite sex and not feel sexual attraction. It is possible, not only statistically, but inductively. Because when it comes to induction, there's always going to be a case in which the rule does not apply. So yes, it is indeed possible for men to be friends with women and not feel sexual or romantic attraction to them. As far as I understand, there is no study out there that says that 100% of men are attracted sexually and romantically to their female friends. There's variation, there's discrepancy, so that is my position. I am not concerned about what ought to be the case because within your original video, you were not making a normative argument. You were not saying that it ought to be the case that men and women shouldn't be friends. You were saying that it is the case that men and women are incapable across the board of being friends. And that is untrue. And so what I'm arguing with you right now is about something descriptive, not something prescriptive. Because when it comes to the prescriptive framing, I think we're more likely to align on certain positions.
The sex drive refers to the strength of sexual motivation. Across many different studies and measures, men have shown to have more frequent and more intense sexual desires than women, as reflected in spontaneous thoughts about sex, frequency and variety of sexual fantasies, desired frequency of intercourse, desired number of partners, masturbation, liking for various sexual practices, willingness to forgo sex, initiating versus refusing sex, making sacrifices for sex, and other measures. No contrary findings indicating stronger sexual motivation among women were found. Hence, we conclude that the male sex drive is stronger than the female sex drive. The gender differences in sex drive should not be generalized to other constructs such as sexual or orgasmic capacity, enjoyment of sex, or extrinsical motivation of sex. Okay.
So before I get into going through this study, which we will, I want to start with this first thing, which is you took a study from freaking 25 years ago. 25 years ago. This is not a recent study. The scientific technology that we had 25 years ago was vastly different than that of what we have now. Not to mention, if you actually were being good faith about this and you were genuinely trying to seek knowledge and come to an impartial conclusion, right? You're not trying to affirm your biases, right? You weren't giving in to confirmation bias. What you would have done is looked at the entire body of evidence and studies and then made a conclusion. But no, you went on Google and you specifically searched for studies that cater to your narrative. Because if you actually did look at the entire body of evidence, you would understand that scientists don't have a consensus on this. They don't believe that men are inherently more sexual than women. And as I said, I demonstrated this within my article if you want to go read it in its entirety. First of all, I can tell you didn't read the study, you just read the abstract, because if you did, you would understand this is a narrative review review, not a systematic review or meta-analysis. It's not conducting publication bias tests as meta-analyses typically do. It's not computing pre-registered inclusion rules, and it's not looking at pooled effect sizes. Instead, what this review is doing is arguing for convergence across many measures and then inferring parsimony. And parsimony is just a scientific principle that things are usually connected, or at the very least behave in the simplest way. This is a very big concept within evolutionary biology and psychology. And the issue with this approach is, by virtue of it not being a meta-analysis, it is far more vulnerable to things like cherry picking and bias. And I don't know if you were trying to do this, but if you were trying to treat it as if it's like there's some kind of scientific consensus, there is no scientific consensus. It's not a meta-analysis. It's not designed to quantify how large or robust the difference is between men and women. Narrative reviews, by virtue of their nature, lack strict protocol. They merely highlight things like trends or theories. Now, if you wanted to provide me with a meta-analysis that was actually good, you would have probably cited the one that is in my article. So it uses a rigorous and reproducible methodology to answer a particular question or hypothesis and minimize bias, and it converges and it brings all the evidence into one space and comes to a conclusion. Now, epistemically, what this means is that narrative reviews are good for broad overviews, but they are not good for evidence-based decision-making or for highlighting causal relations. That is what systematic reviews are for. So you would need to provide a meta-analysis, but nonetheless, like I said, I'll entertain this. Even though it's from 25 years ago, even though it's a narrative review, I'm going to entertain it just for the sake of the argument. So first of all, in regards to the methodology of this narrative review, their strategy was to read abstracts from 2 journals and then just select the journals that they felt were relevant. So again, these researchers didn't conduct a full systematic sweep across databases with reproducible screening. This is why narrative reviews suck, and if you just had taken the time to look at the source that you were referencing instead of trying to use it as some kind of authority or weight within your argument, then you would have known this. This is kind of embarrassing for you. You weren't citing the study to provide actual substance to your argument, you were citing the study in some kind of way of appeal to authority. You know that people aren't going to go read the study, like you didn't, and they're just going to take your word for it. This is why it's so important to go and read studies yourself when people cite them. And not to mention, the reason why they didn't find any contrary findings is because I looked through all of these studies. They are subjective reports. And I don't like subjective reports because they are at risk for confounding variables. They create such a large margin of error, and there are better objective measurements to look towards and to use rather than subjective reports. And the reason why I say this is because there has been theoretical models conceptualized by scientists, specifically psychologists and neuroscientists, where they highlight this reoccurring issue of men overstating their sexual desire. So because a society, men are framed as if they are more sexual. So what men interpret this as is that in order to be more masculine, I need to be more sexual. I need to have more lust. I need to have more appetite. So when we have these surveys and we have these subjective reports, what ends up happening is that they overstate their sexual desire, and this is driven by social desirability pressures to appear more masculine and to conform to sexual scripts. So they report higher frequency and intensity because they want to conform to traditional gender norms. A further issue with subjective self-rating from participants is that they merely rely on their own interpretation of their sex drive. And if you look into sex research, at least to the extent that I have, you'll understand that this is a major flaw that we see across research. Self-reporting is inherently biased. And what's particularly interesting, Ali Dawah, is there was a study conducted by Alexander and Fisher in 2003 in which they concluded that when participants believe they are hooked up to a lie detector, reported gender differences in sexual activity disappear. So this demonstrates the effect of social desirability on participants and their subjective responses. And the narrative review that you cited only uses subjective responses. Overall, self-reports are just unreliable for measuring actual libido because they are heavily influenced by social pressures rather than biological factors. And this is why it's better to look at objective measurements rather than self-reported measurements. Self-reports just will never reflect the level of accuracy that objective measurements so easily provide. And we see this within studies that utilize more objective measurements like the ones I mentioned earlier, like salivary assays or plethysmography or neuronal imaging, hormonal analyses, so forth. These studies show smaller or even sometimes non-existent gender differences in sexual arousal compared to self-reports. Anyways, I'm tangenting. I really hate using surveys and self-reports for biological and neurological claims. It really pisses me off because there's just such a large margin for error. But anyways, like I said, I was going to entertain the narrative review just for the sake of it. So if we're just looking through here, I highlighted a few things that I took issue with. Like, for example, the researchers right here, it is possible that women sometimes do not know that they are sexually aroused, given the less salient nature of female arousal as compared to male arousal. It is thus conceivable that women are aroused more often than they report, and therefore the true gap between genders could be smaller than it appears. And he also argues the same for the converse. Now, the issue that I have with this is the researchers literally acknowledge the issue with subjective reports is that they're not necessarily accurate in reflecting people's true feelings or what they're experiencing in terms of sensory. It's very easy for people to overstate or understate intensity or frequency of a particular feeling or desire. Yet they still use subjective reports. It forms the foundation, the basis of their argument. And again, as we can see here, they found that men were 4 times more likely than women to report having imagined 1,000 or more sex partners. Now, the issue that I have with this is that there are cases and studies that have been conducted which demonstrate that women tend to feel a lot of shame, and so they tend to underreport their sexual desires or their fantasies, especially if they are in a relationship. So you can't prove that women aren't actually having these fantasies about 1,000 or more sex partners, because I have seen women on the internet talk about such. They definitely exist out there. All you can say is that they didn't report it. They are merely more likely to report having imagined these things. You can't prove that they haven't felt or thought these things. And this is because of shame. This is because of stigma. Anyways, those were just a few things that I wanted to touch on. I had a bit more, but I'm going to move on to a few other issues that I have with this paper. They frame the idea of sex drive under something masculine. Like, they use male-coded indicators. Like, they look at things like masturbation frequency or desired numbers of partners or spontaneous sexual thoughts. We understand the ways in which women approach their sexual desire and their sex drive is very different in comparison to men. And also, they're just really inconsistent. Like, I believe they mentioned in the article that cultural differences aren't a strong influence on sex drive, but then Baumeister has a previous study that I actually referenced in my own article, where he conducted another one of these reviews that concluded that gender differences in sexual desire shrink or disappear in more gender equal societies. Ali Dawah, I want to pose to you a question. I want you to just kind of think about this. If it is truly the case that men are intrinsically more sexual than women, then why do we observe that in more egalitarian societies like in America, women tend to exhibit more sexual promiscuity and freedom in comparison to, Eastern societies that diminish female sexual desire, and they stigmatize it and they make it seem like it's something negative. There's an indication here. Sexuality is heavily influenced by socio-cultural variables. This is another issue. I have so many things to get at here. Like, I don't even know how to organize my thoughts right now. There's so many things wrong with this. The issue that I have with framing sexuality as something purely biological, which you attempted to do with this study, and you obviously failed because there was no biological measures in the study. It was mostly surveys and subjective reports. But the issue I take with this is you misunderstand sexuality and sexual desire. It is an interplay of variables. It's not just biology alone, but it's also socio-cultural and environmental variables. And we'll get into that later, hopefully. If there's anything I don't get into in going over your video, I will definitely get into it later in the video. So this study in the garbage, we're not even taking it after all of that.
Okay, now, so the first thing that you've done is you are denying the way we are created. No. Why? Because as a woman, because you do not see the woman in a man in that way, I might find him handsome, but I do not think in a sexual way. Good, that's you, not us. And then it's like, if you're like that, you're barbarism, hedonism, what kind of a man are you, etc. And we've got studies after studies, and not only that, in Islam, it makes it very clear that this is not, this is absolutely normal, it's natural. But let's carry on, inshallah.
Attraction and sexual desire are not the same thing. You can find something physically appealing, physically aesthetic, or harmonious and not want to sexually engage with it. And an easy refutation to this is, would you say that your mother or your sister or your daughter is an attractive woman? I would hope so. I would hope you think highly of the woman in your life. If I say my father is handsome, does that now make it logically the case that I'm sexually attracted to my father? What? And not to mention, are you not literally conceding that every single woman that you find to be conventionally attractive that you also feel sexual impulses for? So you're a married man struggling with forms of mental infidelity.
So good. First thing, as you can see, it's the shame tactic. So it's something abnormal. So what she's talking about is, for example, which another study, research kind of debunks. It's called the Western mark effect. It's called or reverse sexual imprinting. It's a hypothetical psychological effect through which people will live in close domestic proximity during the first years of their life become desensitized to sexual attraction. The effect is not just only applicable for biological related families, but also in complete strangers who were brought up together. Okay.
This part is so funny to me because he calls this a study, but it quite literally says here that it is a posited theory, right? It's a potential explanation for something from a Wikipedia entry. This is not a study. But regardless, Ali Dawah, we agree. You don't understand that the things that you're invoking. It's insane to me, and this is why I take issue with the things that you say on your platform and why I say people should not watch you. But anyways, the point here is I don't think you realize this, but we agree. Yes, I agree with you that we are not sexually attracted to our parents, to our family members, to the people in proximity to us from childbirth. But what you don't realize you're doing here is you are conceding. You're moving the goalposts. You don't even understand your own logic. You presupposed a definition of attraction that implied something sexual. I didn't do that. You did that. But in this part right here, you demonstrate that you realize and understand that there's different definitions of attraction. And it even says here in this own little article that you cited, sexual attraction. The fact that we have to add that distinguisher, sexual, in front of attraction indicates that attraction doesn't just have one meaning. It doesn't just have one interpretation or context.
And the title is called "Why Are We Not Attracted to Our Siblings?" The Western mark effect and self-regime theory shows that. So, which is what? It is a platonic relationship. Just because, for example, I might say my daughter is very attractive, or for example, my mother or my sister, etc. Because I've brought up with them, there are so many other factors that play a key role in why I would not have that in that specific situation. And even it's applied to people that you may have grown up with. That kind of attraction is not there. And even Islamically, a boy and a girl, when they reach the age of 7, they are told to sleep in separate beds. There is a reason for that.
Amazing, Ali Dawah. Again, we agree. But you don't understand that this is contradictory to the logic that you were providing in the beginning, in the first video. You are literally conceding that there is indeed a case in which a man can be attracted to a woman or understand that she is attractive or conventionally attractive and not want to be sexually intimate with her. And your own theory proves this. Your own theory proves this about the people that you were speaking to. Those kids literally told you, we've known her since we were younger. We've known her for years. I've known her for a long time. That's why I don't think of her sexually. I do understand that she's attractive, but I don't think of her sexually. And you tried to gaslight them and make them feel like they were wrong. And this is how I know. What did you do? You didn't have this study. You didn't have this knowledge before you went into that conversation. You went and looked for the study and the knowledge after you made the claims. And that's the issue that I have. If you were being good faith, if you had genuine concern for your audience, and you understood the moral principle of truth-telling, propagating truthful information, then what you would have done is had these studies prior to your argument, prior to giving dawah. You wouldn't have looked for them after. What does it mean to have intellectual honesty? What does it mean to have a commitment to truth-seeking, to ensure that the pursuit of knowledge is not compromised by your personal biases, prejudice, or the desire to win arguments? It means to not only obviously prioritize evidence and logical over your personal beliefs, even when those findings contradict your pre-established beliefs or favored theories, but also that you don't make claims unless you're mostly certain about them, or that you're confident in them. That you don't make claims until you've done the research and you've done the work to form an argument. Me personally, I will never make a claim publicly, and I will never label myself with something until I feel confident with it, and I feel like I've read enough literature, and I feel like I've formulated my opinion on something in a way that is strong, and in a way that demonstrates that I understand it. And I don't start with a claim and then look for evidence or try to formulate my argument. I start with the evidence and I start looking at the body of arguments that, philosophers and scholars have published. And then I come to my own conclusion and make a claim. That is why I say that people should not watch you, because you don't have integrity. You don't have intellectual honesty. You are not committed to truth seeking. You are committed to rhetoric. You're committed to getting people to follow what you say. That is more important to you than truth. And not only is it an issue of deception, not only is it an issue of misrepresenting facts, not only is it an issue of bias and catering to a desired conclusion, it's also an issue for yourself, for your nafs, for your soul, for your character, because you're being dishonest with yourself. You're not granting yourself the opportunity to have some kind of intellectual challenge. You're not granting yourself to have courage to confront your biases, to work against your own self-deception. You're not working against your tendency to believe what you want to be true. And that's not only a disservice amongst others, but amongst yourself, most importantly.
I've witnessed firsthand how crazy it is to suddenly find myself wildly attracted to a woman that 8 hours earlier I had no interest in whatsoever. And I think this is an unavoidable fact. If you spend a lot of time around someone and get emotionally and intimately close to each other, even if it's platonic, you'll consistently run the risk of developing romantic or sexual feelings for that person, even if you've never experienced them in the past. So it would suggest that women are already consciously or subconsciously aware of the fact that men are worse at maintaining platonic relationships. And I suspect a lot of this has to do with an intimacy gap in men's lives. Men in general experience a lot less emotional support from their friends than women do. If you just have a look at this study from the UK, you'll see that women experience twice as much emotional support from their female friends as men do. They are likely to be told they are loved by a friend twice as often as a man, and they are 60% more likely to share personal feelings or problems with their friends. This represents a massive gap, an intimacy connection that men just aren't getting. Men usually only receive this level of intimacy from their romantic relationships. And so no wonder it becomes confusing for us when we suddenly experience this level of connection and emotional support from a woman that's supposed to be platonic. Because for us, the only time we've ever experienced that is when we're with someone romantic.
I don't know why you're doing a disservice to this Unk. He's obviously a very sweet guy. He seems to have so much good intention with this video, and you're misrepresenting it to cater to a very problematic narrative that I don't even think he would agree with you on. What he's not saying in that video is that men and women struggle to be friends because they misinterpret social cues by virtue of the fact that they are inherently more sexual. No, what he's saying and what you're misrepresenting is he's saying that men and women typically struggle to just be friends and there not being any like underlying sexual or romantic feelings because men don't have exposure to emotional depth. This is a social construction imposed upon men. I know, Ali Dawah, you probably think men are more logical and women are more emotional, and this is why it is. No, this is not inherent to the biology of men or women. That's another argument for another day. This is primarily socialized. So men don't typically experience this level of emotional depth within their platonic relationships. So when they finally experience that level of emotional depth from a woman who has been socialized to be in tune with her emotional state and emotional intelligence, he misreads these cues as some kind of romantic depth. He misreads this platonic care as an invitation for something romantic. And he ends up developing feelings because he's never been treated this way. He's never had someone care for him in this way and just be a friend. So he thinks there must be more to this when in reality there isn't more to this. And what men need to do is not just accept that this is the way they are. No, men need to learn how to be more in tune with their emotions and have more emotionally deep relationships with their own male friends. Not only because the rate of depression for men is skyrocketing and it is much higher, and they need that kind of support in their lives, but also because they need to be able to navigate environments where they have platonic relationships with women, like a coworker or an acquaintance or a family friend. But anyways, continue.
SubhanAllah, then you come and say something very, very bizarre. Let's hear for ourselves, inshallah.
Because you lack discipline and control, you're now subjecting your current wife to your mental infidelity.
Good. So she's saying that because you lack mental control. So in a nutshell, this is like, she talks about barbarism, which is very ironic because in the Dark Ages when there was actual barbarism, and I'm not saying Islam said this, but many other religions like Christianity, etc., they see desire, having intimacy and pleasure of intimacy as something blameworthy. They see it as unnatural. It's like she said, hedonistic and barbaric, etc. They would say the same thing about women. They would discuss if a woman had a soul. They would come and say that a woman having sexual pleasure, even in the Muslim world, this is not Islamic, that a woman has no right to sexual intimacy or for sexual pleasure, and that is not from Islam. So if anything, you're talking about barbarism and hedonism, it goes back to what? It goes back to the worldview in the Dark Ages where they would blame women like you, and imagine you're being told what you're telling me, you go have self-control, etc. It's like, imagine a woman being told, have some self-control, why are you enjoying pleasure? In Islam, a woman has every right to enjoy pleasure. Not only that, a woman who is sexually not satisfied, who came to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and asked for divorce, the actual basis is what? A woman has a right. Not only that, we are told that it is charity to our partners, that when we have intimacy, it's like charity. They have a right to have sexual gratification and enjoyment. Imagine I'm scolding a woman and saying, how dare you? Did you enjoy that? How dare you enjoy that? What is the difference between you and me? And you will call that misogynistic, and you're doing the same thing with this. It's misandry, because you're saying, no, how dare you? Well, let's go to something a bit shocking.
This is not misandry. Completely just strawmanned my position. I never said that feeling pleasure is what is wrong. It is the excessive indulgence of pleasure and following that pleasure and allowing to dictate what is moral or not moral. That is what's hedonistic. Let's presuppose that it is indeed natural for men to be this sexual and this lustful, and it is a part of their nature. Let's presuppose it. I'll grant you that premise, just for the sake of arguments. You still can't make the argument that it's moral. There's an is-ought gap, which I believe David Hume talks about within his literature, is that you can't jump from how something is to how something ought to be, or whether or not it's okay. Like, for example, saying, this is natural, therefore it is good, or therefore it is okay. But anyways, I don't have much to say on this. I never said that pleasure is bad in itself. Like, I don't think it's bad for a man to feel pleasure with his wife, or a woman to feel pleasure with her husband. No, I think it's a beautiful thing, actually, and I think, it should be something that's more cherished and encouraged amongst couples. What is hedonistic is thinking it's okay to indulge in being attracted to any woman that you see and wanting to pursue something sexual with her. Yeah, that is a hedonistic desire. It's not disciplined, it's not controlled, it's you letting your impulses go free. Let me feel them all. When in reality, you can control them, because it's not from biology alone. As I mentioned earlier, it's an interplay of variables, and they all have just as much influence. And we're not animals. That is what makes us distinct from animals, at least morally. We can aim for higher ordered goods and to be better persons, to live a good life, and so forth.
Let's watch this for ourselves.
Me personally, I would be sick to my stomach if my husband was incapable of looking at a woman who was conventionally attractive and not think about her sexually. Because according to your logic, if we're universalizing it, that means every single attractive woman that you see, you want to have sex with them.
Good. And again, this shows literally, like, it's they have no idea. And this is the reason why you need to understand something. Okay, there are certain things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created you in. That's why to your psychology, you think this is abnormal. Now, let me tell you something clearly. Abdullah bin Abbas narrates that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was walking one day. You're a Muslim woman. He was walking one day and he happened to see a woman, not looked on purpose, happened to see a woman who he had a desire. An instant, what did we talk about? How a man's sexual tendencies there is no match with a woman. This is why, my dear sister, with all due respect, you're living in absolute la land. And we're here to educate both each other to understand this reality. He saw a woman, had a desire in his heart, and what did he do? He went back to his wife, Zainab, and had intimacy with her. Now, is Zainab going to say, oh, I will feel sick to my stomach to have a husband who goes out and sees a woman? This is the reality of men. Welcome to our world. It doesn't make us sick. It doesn't make us less. This is how we are created. Why can you not respect that way we're created? When we respect the way women's created, you have menopause, you have the menstrual cycle, you have hormones up and down. And as a man, there's so many times where we are told to be patient with our wives. There's things she says that she doesn't mean. But when it comes vice versa, we're like, oh, no. We are made to be inhumane. How could you? I feel sick to my stomach. So the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, not only that, go to the Quran, go Surah Yusuf, the Prophet of Allah. Allah says, Yusuf alayhi salam, when he was being seduced by the woman, he's a Prophet of God. He had an inclination towards her. And Allah says that we showed the signs of Allah. When the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, when a man and a woman is alone, the third is Satan. Yes, what are you going to say? So on what basis are you trying to defend this premise?
Okay, I think this is a really, really distasteful representation of the Prophet. I really don't want to get into religion, because I don't want to entertain you moving the goalpost and going from biological justifications to logical justifications, empirical justifications, and then religious justifications. Like, you have to pick, like, you really got to stick to one thing, bro. And I really don't like to get into religion, just because I think it needs to be treated with a level of sensitivity that I often can't provide. But yeah, there's no issue with this hadith. You're presupposing that the Prophet entertained that sexual attraction and that sexual desire. It is normal, right? Men and women, your wife as well, although you probably don't want to admit it, is capable of feeling sexually aroused by someone else, is capable of being aroused by someone else, is capable of having those feelings for someone else, or there's some kind of situation that arouses those kinds of feelings. We're human beings, these things happen from time to time. What matters is discipline, right? If you truly want to be faithful and devotional and loyal to your partner, what should you do? And I talked about this in my article, Men Are Not Wallets and Women Are Not Prizes. I'm actually going to be posting a video on it very soon. But what you should do is, because Infidelity, I think we can all agree, often starts with the mind, right? It starts with thoughts. It starts with desire. Whether it be something emotional, whether it be something small, whether it be physical, whatever it may be, any form of infidelity to any capacity, to any degree, it starts with something mental. So what is something that I implement, and that when I get married, I expect my own husband to implement in his life, is because we are not animals, we're not barbaric, right? We're capable of governing our impulses. I expect that when he has a thought like that, he stops that thought. He stops engaging with not only the desire for another woman, but the thought of another woman in that way. And now you're assuming here, we don't have context, right? We don't know. You're assuming that the Prophet entertained that desire, entertained that thought. No, what I see this as, he felt that, he knew it was wrong, and what did he do? He went and shut it down and redirected it to his partner. That's not wrong. Nonetheless, I believe this is a very distasteful misrepresentation of the Prophet, and that particular circumstance, it's not like we know if he was engaging with that desire or the thought of the woman, or if he was even doing that when he went to go do it with his wife. But we can likely presume from consistency with other pieces of texts in Islam, like the Quran and Hadith, that it's likely that wasn't the case. And you want to bring Islam into this, you really want to get into religion, okay, fine. You're telling me I'm wrong for trying to make men feel shameful for this desire that they have within their heart whenever they look at an attractive woman. You're trying to justify your desire. I'm sorry, that's the way that it comes off to me, Ali Dawah, and that's why I have an issue with this. You are really, really pandering to your own desire here. Because Islamically, we have Hadith pointing to the fact that zina of the eye exists. It is adultery for you to have a lustful look at another woman, especially a woman who is not your wife. This is not something good or permissible within Islam. The heart yearning for and desiring and lusting after a woman, that is why both men and women are ordered to lower their gaze. Both men and women are capable of looking at someone and being attracted to them and having lustful desires, and therefore you should lower your gaze. Avoid zina of the eyes. And you are correct, you're not responsible for what crosses your minds. Everyone has intrusive thoughts, everyone has these, spur of the moment impulses, but what matters is if you shut them down and you practice discipline as Islam has told you to. It's quite intuitive that if you have this issue with looking at someone attractive and you're not able to distinguish or separate your desire and your arousal from attractiveness, that you shouldn't look at women in that way, that you shouldn't entertain those thoughts, because why? If you entertain them, you might fall into something sinful. It's intuitive, it's logical. The scholars have indicated that people will be held accountable for the actions of the heart. You are expected to strive to overcome sin. You should not dwell on sinful thoughts intentionally, and you should not allow them to take root. I don't know why you're allowing this level of permissibility that's so obviously looked down upon. If you are actively and intentionally dwelling on and fantasizing about forbidden scenarios, that can be considered haram. So what the Prophet did was redirect that desire. He likely shut it down. He didn't dwell on that thought. He didn't dwell on that desire. And to prevent it from dwelling further, he went to his wife. We know from Ibn Qudama that he disapproves of looking at anything with desire, in order to prevent provoking desire or leading to something sinful or prohibited. Ibn Uthaymeen says that mere passing thoughts shouldn't be entertained. You should ignore them. I don't understand the relevance of bringing up this hadith about the Prophet, unless you're trying to frame it in a way that's honestly very distasteful to the Prophet. But regardless, I want to move on from this because, again, I'm not here to entertain the religious argument, because you made it one of something about logic and biology, and that's what I wanted to focus on.
Ali Dawah, I don't know why people listen to him. What am I saying? A man and a woman cannot be friends. Why are you arguing against that? Why? Because it's coming from me? That is so petty. It is so petty, subhanAllah, that you are focused on that. And not only that, we have got studies. Like, I'll show you one other study, for example. This is a graph that shows what? Women receive more emotional support from their friends. Percentage of women Americans who report the following experience in the past week. Men compared to women. Let's go to men. Received emotional support from their friend. Look at, it's nearly double the number pertaining when you compare men to women. Told a friend you love them. Women are more likely to tell their friends that they love them compared to men. Shared personal feelings or problems with a friend. Women are nearly as double as likely. Now, do you know what's interesting about the study? This means that the reason why a man and a woman cannot be friends is because in this study it shows that with us as men, the only place where we have this kind of a woman opening up to us and affection and I love you and this, that is when it's in marriage. As women, you guys get that. You guys perform or explore or express those things to your male counterparts. Now, your male counterpart, because they do not have that, they only have that with their partner, which is not platonic, which is a sexual relationship. When they see that from a woman, they say what? she's interested in me. But a woman thinks what? No, he's just my friend. And we've seen ample evidence of people like, oh, he's just a friend. Okay, call him. Call him and saying that you're interested in him. What's the result? Oh, yeah, I want to go on a date. I've been waiting for this all my life. Do you understand the reality? We cannot be friends, period. Islamically, psychologically, physiologically, you name it. Biologically, the way we are programmed and created, we can't be. So the question is, why are you bringing me into it? And as if I'm calling for something strange, on what basis?
Okay, first of all, yeah, I agree with you on that. This is like a social issue. Men and women are socialized in particular ways, and so they're going to interpret certain dynamics in relationships in respective ways. I don't disagree with that, as I said earlier. I just think you're using it in a way that's pretty disingenuous. Also, again, it is not universal. You are treating these statements as if they are universal, and that's what I have an issue with. You're not saying it's typically the case that men are going to be attracted to their female friends. If you said that, I would agree with that. But you're saying it's the case that all men are attracted to their female friends, and that's why they can't be friends with them. That's not true, because there are men who aren't attracted to their female friends, at least in the way that you are defining attraction as something that is sexual. You're just wrong on this. I don't know what to say. It is possible for a man and a woman to be friends. Is that usually the case, that it's purely platonic? No, and that's something that we need to work on in society. We need to work on discipline. We need to work on our dynamics, the way that we interact with each other. And because it is typically the case that men and women can't often have purely platonic relationships, prevention is better, right? I agree with you on that. I think it's better to just generally avoid it to the best of your ability, or at the very least, if you have to be in proximity to men or in proximity to the opposite sex, that is having family friends, or you're at school or you're at work, or you guys have acquaintances, or like, some couples, like the husband and the wife are friends with like another couple, another husband and a wife, and they always hang out together. I think in these cases there's a little bit more leeway, but nonetheless, I generally agree with you. It doesn't usually work, and for that case, you should limit your relationships to the ones I just mentioned, and you shouldn't try to form deep friendships, keyword. I know some people don't like my opinion on this, but you should try to avoid forming deep friendships, like having a male best friend or very close male friend, or if you're, a man, same thing when it comes to women. When you're in a relationship, just because of the risk. It's not definitive, it's not certain, it's not 100% going to be the case that it's going to happen, but there's always a possibility. And in my case, if I were married, I just don't want to risk that. I would like to think I would love my husband so much, and he means the world to me, and my marriage means the world to me, and it comes above everything else, and there's nothing I'm willing to forsake it for. And so I'm willing to compromise on some friendships if it means that I can have a more fulfilling relationship with my partner, and I don't ever risk betraying them or hurting them.
Any evidence from Islam, Quran, Sunnah? Any studies, any research? No. Based on what? Just so you can differ with me. Why? Because you don't agree with me. Sister, let's be grown-ups, inshallah.
I'll give you the evidence in a moment. But you're not biologically programmed and created in this way. Stop. I hate this. You keep jumping from religion to biology, whatever it may be, because you know there's nothing in Islam that explicitly says this, so you jump to biology and you try to jump to logic to justify what you're saying. And you ask this towards the end of the video, why am I so bothered by this? Because the way that you're framing it as something that is biological is not only untrue, it's just disingenuous to the studies and the evidence that exists, but you're also creating a narrative about men that is immutable, and it justifies behaviors that should not be justified. It is not okay for you to look at other women. It is not okay for you to look at an attractive woman and feel attraction. It happens, I'm not saying it doesn't, but you shouldn't. And you can develop a level of cognitive discipline to the point where you don't feel those things anymore. And I can say that for myself. I can say that for other men that I've met. I can say that for my own father and the men within my own life. I have had great men around me who have emulated honorable behaviors and characteristics. And that is why I believe so fervently that these kinds of men exist, and that men are capable of exhibiting this kind of discipline, and women are as well. You ought to train your mind to shut those things down, to not engage with them, to not even perceive them, so that when you're in a relationship, it doesn't ever get in the way of it. You don't risk making your partner feel insecure, and you don't end up attempting to justify something that shouldn't be justified.
Let's carry on watching the video.
And you're lying if you say that you don't find any other woman conventionally attractive other than your wife. And honestly, this is an insult to men. It attempts to paint all men as hedonistic because you are hedonistic.
So it's an insult to man. That's the reason why men are polygamous by nature. Because yes, they have that inclination, and the Prophet Muhammad and the hadith clearly shows that. That's the reason why men have that and you can't. And the reason why it's so odd for you and you deem it as hedonism and it's bad and it's barbaric is because you are not wired like that. Why is it that men buy adult magazines, watch adult movies, watch all this kind of stuff?
Yeah, so I talk about this in my article. You're doing kind of what that narrative review did, in which you frame sexual indulgence through male-coded patterns. So men typically tend to, indulge in, a certain kind of content. And I think if you actually cared about, what women were interested in, you would understand that a lot of women read certain kinds of novels, they read certain kinds of books. So the way in which we indulge in our desires is different, but it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. Like, I would arguably say that women consume novels on about the same rate as men, if not potentially more. And I feel like this perspective that you have on women, that we're just not these indulgent creatures, we're not also human, is because I think you just lack experience with women, which mashallah, good on you, you lack exposure with women and experience with women, and that's why you think this. But coming from a woman who has interacted with thousands and thousands and thousands of women and has received thousands and thousands of messages from women, I'm telling you with confidence you are wrong. Now, you know what, I'll agree with you. Statistically, irregardless of where you get it from, there's varying statistics, right? It is just the case that men watch this kind of content and consume it more than women. But I don't think that this is because women are inherently less sexual. I think it's for a plethora of reasons, one of which being the fact that women are less likely to admit to consuming that kind of content due to societal taboos, right? They're more likely to be shamed. If a woman were to come out and say, I watched this, you think people would take that with a grain of salt? No, especially a Muslim woman. And I don't think that women are less likely to seek it out because of lower libido, but because this kind of content is produced for men and structured around the male gaze. Most forms of this content or media are violent, they're unrealistic, and it's very unenjoyable for the average woman to view and watch. And like I said earlier, you're failing to recognize that women consume other forms of this kind of content, arguably in larger quantities than men. So for example, certain types of fiction are very prevalent amongst contemporary generations of women. You're ignoring the fact that there's different kinds of media that people consume. So there's visual forms, and then there's literary or emotional forms, yet you're ignoring it. And again, any studies and statistics regarding, consumption of this kind of media are self-reported. You're not accounting for social variables that might cause someone not to report that they are indeed consuming it.
Do you see women going and saying, oh, I like that man's calves, I cannot wait to see his fingers or his calves? Or you don't have that. You are not created like that. So why are you demeaning us?
No, we do have that. I know plenty of women who talk like this. I've seen plenty of women talk like this. I don't know what you're talking about. Again, Ali Dawah, I think you're very sheltered, and I think you're not exposed to a lot of women, especially you're not that chronically online, although you post a lot. I don't think you're familiar with the internet, so I don't think that you've seen the kinds of women online or in the West, but they do indeed exist. I think if you ask most men and younger generations of men, they will admit to this.
And belittling us and calling us barbarians and hedonistic because we have a natural inclination to that. That's how we are created. That's why men can have multiple partners, because they can cater for that. You can't. You love one man, that man is your man. It's simple as that. But no.
Yeah, so on the note of polygamy, you can go read my argument for why it's not necessarily natural in the way that he's framing it. Now, whether or not it's okay, whether or not it's moral, I'm not getting into that. I don't necessarily have strong objections to it. But whether or not men and women are intrinsically polygamous or monogamous, respectfully, you can't make that conclusion if you look at evolutionary biology. We have within novels written by evolutionary biologists such as William Urbard or Geoffrey Miller or Jeffrey Miller, I think that's it, sorry. They demonstrate cases in which females were likely quote-unquote polygamous, or they had more promiscuous mating dynamics. So the current institution in which women are only allowed one male partner is due to societal and political influences and so forth, and the institutions we've built around these kinds of stigmas. It's not because women choose this. There are plenty of women who I'm sure would say, yeah, I would like to have multiple partners. We can find women who will self-report that. So the fact that we have a number of women reporting those kinds of things demonstrates that it's not a part of biology. Now, what I believe is monogamy and devotion and, that singularity is the pinnacle of love's truest expression. So I think if you want an actualized relationship, if you're looking for love, if you're looking for fulfillment, if you're looking for building, a truly meaningful family, the best way to do that is through monogamy. But if you're looking for provision, if you're looking for support, if you're looking for some kind of other interests, then polygamy can serve that purpose. So I don't necessarily agree with the women who say those things or the men who say these things. But nonetheless, there is evidence from evolutionary biology demonstrating that women might have been polygamous or promiscuous in the past. They likely had multiple partners. Human beings didn't necessarily mate for life. Like, we didn't pick one partner and then die with them. I can't get into the specifics just for the sake of guidelines. But if you want to understand what my argument is for this, you really need to go read the article. I think it's within section 1 where I specifically go into the biology, so you don't need to read the whole article, but if you want to understand that particular part, that's where you can read it. But I really can't get into it due to guidelines. Nonetheless, my point here is that polygamy, monogamy, whatever it may be, multiple partners, these are preferences. Like, they're not intrinsic to anyone. Like, you're not destined to be polygamous because you're a man, and you're not destined to be monogamous because you're a woman, and vice versa. It depends on the person, it depends on their values, it depends on what they're looking for in a marriage, in a relationship. Do they want something actualized? Do they want something transactional and just convenient? There are plenty of men out there who genuinely don't want polygamy. Like, anecdotally, I have met men like this. So if it really were the case that men were just inherently polygamous, then an overwhelming majority of them would report wanting a polygamous marriage. But that's just not the case. There's plenty of scholars that encourage monogamous marriages alongside scholars that encourage polygamous marriages. There's variation. Human sexuality is incredibly variable, and it's contingent upon a plethora of influences, not just biology. And this is very reductionist, and most scientists would not agree with what you're saying.
Why do you have to be like me, sister? I've seen so many of your videos a long time ago where you just want to be like a man. No, there's no difference between us. Islamically, we are not the same. Why do you find it so hard to grasp that? Let's carry on, inshallah.
Not all men are enslaved by their sexual desires. Some men are mature, and some men are able to look at a conventionally attractive woman and separate that from their sexual desire. They are able to demarcate between the two because they're not barbaric. Not to mention, if you think like this and you encourage other men to think like this, you are reinforcing a culture which sexualizes and objectifies women, and which by extension would sexualize and objectify your own wife, your daughters, your sisters, your mother. This is also why a lot of men are incapable of having platonic relationships with women, like having an acquaintance that's female. If you can't look at a conventionally attractive...
So do you see what I mean now? Now she's turned it into sexual objectification. Just because the man is created in that way? No, it's sexual objectification. No, it's not. It's the reality how God Almighty has created us, and that's why there are boundaries in place. The question is, if that is the case, then are you blaming Allah? Because Allah's put boundaries. A man and a woman cannot be friends. They cannot be in the same place together. You have to speak to the guardian. Why didn't Allah say go on dates and get to know each other? Because He knows what will happen. So again, remember what I said? Your problem is not with me. I'm just being thrown under the bus because your problem is with Islam per se.
This is so illogical. I can't even get into how many logical fallacies you just exhibited. Like, it's truly a talent. Like, holy mental gymnastics.
Because that's how it comes across. Because this is a reality. Why are you denying that reality? That men and women cannot be friends, and those things are in place to protect both genders.
This is also why a lot of men are incapable of having platonic relationships with women, like having an acquaintance that's female. If you can't look at a conventionally attractive...
And then now what you're doing is calling for something unnatural. Would your father and your brother be okay with you having friends? No, because they would say, listen, deep down, I'm a man and I know how I've been created. It can't be. Let alone we're living in a hyper-sexualized society. If there's anyone, we understand that men find women, I think there was a study done, 60 to 70% men find most women attractive. Women, I think they said only a lot of men that they looked at, they only found 4.5% attractive, which again shows the differences that we have.
I don't know what women being selective about who they choose and who they engage with has to do with libido, but okay.
A lot of men find a lot of women attractive, but women do not find as many men attractive. And that's the reason why you're coming from your paradigm of your logic, the way Allah's created you, and you think this is so absurd. To you it is, not to us. It's not news. Any man that's watching this, he's thinking, yeah, damn right. Because you are so far from that reality, and now you're calling for something that is against Islam, and it's not natural, which is what? Let's just be friends. We can be friends. No, you cannot be friends. You can't be friends. And Islamically, and Quran and Sunnah, and studies and research clearly show this reality.
Person and not think of them sexually, I think we might have issues. Dawah, there's no logical explanation for this, although you try to use buzzwords and you try to posture it as such. And even if you did try to provide a logical argument, you would have to presuppose things that are absurd. It's not logic, it's projection. What you actually mean is when you find women attractive, you sexualize them. You do, not all men. Unfortunately, not all men are the same. You do, not all men. Unfortunately, not all men are the same. There are good men out there, and you don't set the standard.
Do you see what I'm saying? So the standard is what? You are guilty There are men that not like that. This is my dear sister, with all due respect. If you talk about absurdity, if there's anything, you haven't given us any reference, any research, nothing. No, forget research. Quran and Sunnah, any evidence? Nothing.
Yeah, I don't need evidence, Ali Dawah, because your claim was something logical. You literally said it within the video. You asked those kids to demonstrate to you how it's logical that you can find her attractive and not want to engage with her. So I was explaining to you how it's illogical. I wasn't explaining it to you empirically. You didn't ask me for evidence. You didn't ask those kids for evidence. You asked them for logic. There's a distinction between rationalism and empiricism.
I've brought you evidence from the Quran, from the Sunnah, from research, from studies, etc. All you've done is just venture yourself out. That's all you've done, my dear sister. And this just shows you how weak your argument is. And not only that, it just shows that the perception that you have as a woman is so far from reality. That's the reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has ordered the man to be the leader. Because there are certain, that's why your guardian is not your mother, is your father. Because we as men, we are logical and rational. We see through certain things. Do you get what I'm trying to say?
You just proved to me that you're not logical and rational. Like Ali Dawah, like again, respectfully. I don't know how to frame this and make it more palatable in a way that's nice. But let's be frank here, do you seriously think you're more logical than me? Moving on. That's another argument for another day. This video is focused on libido. I don't want to get into intelligence and how you're wrong on this.
And there was a study done, for example, that showed a man and a woman observing a game being played, and the ones, for example, if they were to cheat, they get electric shock, they get pain. Yes? Okay. And they also got electric shock when they did not cheat, for example. Okay. Guess what happened? When both the man and the woman, they responded the same to a person who was getting electric shock unjustly. They did not deserve it. It was like, that's wrong. Yes? And they had empathy. Okay. But however, when the man who was caught cheating from both angles, from a man and a woman's perspective, got the electric shock, the man showed signs of pleasure and the woman showed signs of empathy. Which means what? When it comes to judgment, her judgment is clouded. Why? Because she said, even though he is wrong, but the fact that he got electric shock, I have empathy from him. A man had pleasure, meaning he got what he deserved. This is why it shows the differences we have.
What is this? She's not a barbarian. Of course she's going to experience empathy. That's a normal human emotion, to watching someone get shocked and experience pain. That just demonstrates that the woman was more empathetic than the man, and perhaps women tend to be more empathetic. That doesn't mean that she thinks it's morally right, or she thinks it's morally wrong that he's being punished. No, I don't know how you're making that jump. How does that mean that her judgment is clouded? She can still come to the conclusion that he deserved it, or that he was wrong, and still feel empathy. The two are not mutually exclusive.
And my question, and lastly I'll leave on this, why is it that you are so adamantly feminist, radical feminist, I'm not saying you are, yes, you have certain tendencies, are so hell-bent on making men and women the same? We are not the same. In the sight of Allah, our deeds are the same. But we are totally separate beings.
You said you're not saying I'm a radical feminist, but then you're addressing the question to me. Ali Dawah, I think if we debated and I asked you to define feminism, or radical feminism, or choice feminism, or liberal feminism, I don't even think you would be able to, because like I said, you like to use buzzwords, you don't actually do your research, you don't have intellectual honesty or integrity. You're very, very rhetorical, and you like to feed into people's desire for tribalism, right? Framing feminism as if it's inherently bad. And before you get ahead of yourself, I'm actually agnostic on the issue of whether or not I'm a feminist or whether or not I label myself as one. I'm not necessarily opposed to feminism, but I also wouldn't necessarily label myself as a feminist. Just because I haven't read enough feminist literature, I don't feel like I understand it in its entirety, and I want to give it the due diligence it deserves. Not to mention I hold a few views here and there, although they're very small in comparison to my other views, that would be considered fringe or contradictory to feminism, and that's why I don't necessarily know if I would label myself as a feminist. I also just don't like to be an ideologue, but anyways, I'm yapping too much about myself. My point here is I've never labeled myself as a feminist, let alone a radical feminist, or a choice feminist, or a liberal feminist.
And we need to accept that reality. And the reason I've done this video is because she's done many videos about me, and what you're saying is not that about me. It's basically you're given a false message, which is absolutely debunked, with all due respect, sister. So I don't want this to be a back and forth. I have nothing personal against you. You're my sister in Islam. Yes, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy on you and myself as well. Okay, but what I'm saying is, think about it. You came out here differentiating, saying that I am wrong for a reason. And all you did is because I am Ali Dawah, because you don't like me. I mean, imagine if I'd done a video just because of who you are, that would be silly. That's what I want to say, inshallah. Till next time, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Like I said, I didn't make this video because of who you are. But anyways, to your question, why am I so hell-bent on making men and women the same? No, I don't think that they're the same. I think they're biologically different, but I think the things that you're invoking from biology are not true. Now, morally, do I think they have the same moral value? Yes, I think men and women have the same moral value, and therefore they have the same personhood, and they ought to have the same opportunities and rights. And that's demonstrated through a plethora of rulings throughout Islam. I don't want to get into them specifically, but it's very clear that we individually still have personhood in spite of certain rulings. So yeah, I think they're morally equal. I think they both have the same moral value, intrinsic value, personhood. So I don't know what you're asking me here. I never said men and women are exactly the same biologically. That would just be factually incorrect. But yeah, that's the end of his video. I've demonstrated how a lot of the things he said were a load of baloney, but I would like to get into a little bit of my perspective, and I would like to show you some of my article. So it's titled The Myth of Male Hypersexuality, and I basically go into the common narrative that, sorry, I don't know why I'm speaking with a British accent? I can't speak right now. I go into the conventional wisdom that's often propagated that men inherently have a higher libido than women. I talk about it biologically, I bring up commonly cited studies, I refute them, I bring up my own studies, and then I talk about why this perspective is problematic. I'm not going to get into everything in this study because that would take far too much time. I think it's 10,000 words. I think it's 10,000 words. So I don't have the time, but it's a really, really good paper, in my opinion, and it has lots of likes, and it blew up on Substack. So, but basically one thing I talked about in this article is the issue that I take with his framing of biology is because it's very disingenuous and misleading. From a biological perspective, at least in the way that most scientists, neurologists, psychologists, so forth frame sexuality, is that it's shaped by a plethora of factors, an interplay of variables. But it's also further influenced by socio-cultural variables and environment and how you are nurtured. Desire isn't just dictated by biology. Like, environmental influences play an equally significant role in shaping how people experience and express their sexual desire. And then that also goes on to influence neurological behaviors and structures and so forth. So even if you were to find a study that showed that men have more brain activity in a certain region when looking at certain kinds of content or whatever it may be, or when thinking of certain things, whatever, even that's not strong enough to establish a causal relation. So lots of things influence the way that we think, the way that we experience things, the way that we engage with them. And the most important thing that dictates this is our brain. Right? Your central nervous system, your brain is what modulates your hormones, right? And not only that, it modulates your feelings, the desires you have, the inclinations and impulses you have. The brain has plasticity. It can change and it will shape itself to its environment. So take, for example, what we've seen is that taxi drivers tend to have a much larger hippocampus and more active hippocampus because they have to memorize the streets more. At least their hippocampus is much larger and active in comparison to the average person who doesn't have to engage with memorization to that extent. So it's not that taxi drivers just inherently have better memory. No, it's that this brain region is constantly being trained and it evolves to adapt for that. But I want to get into just a couple of studies that I mentioned within the article, and like I said, you can go look at it yourself. I'm not going to go through everything. If you want to be good faith and you want to genuinely understand my position, I really recommend you go read them. But there was one study that looked at gender differences and similarities in arousal, desire, pleasure, so forth, and they included a model which posited that men and women follow similar patterns of arousal but just differ in orgasmic resolution. And what this study is basically attempting to demonstrate is that after finishing, women tend to have a shorter refractory period, whereas men have a much longer one. So this is why women tend to pursue more rounds after intercourse, whereas men can't go for that long, and they usually need a break. And so the reason why I think this is really interesting is because if women experience higher pleasure and also remain more sexually receptive rather than exhibiting a refractory period after orgasming, it is possible that a woman's sexual response cycle allows for greater sexual motivation. And this also reinforces the theory within evolutionary biology that women likely were promiscuous maters. That is, they had intercourse with multiple men, and whoever had the strongest sperm is basically who wins. It really does provide a reasonable explanation, because what other reason would women have such a capacity for engaging for that long, whereas men do not? There was another neurological study that was conducted where they examined whether neural activation patterns associated with arousal differed in men and women, and they found neural responses in respective brain regions And overall, the study never supported the idea that men and women have innate biological advantage in sexual motivation. Hamid Nouri, one of the contributors, stated in an alternative interview that neurocircuitry has been studied in depth, and there is no significant difference in which neural pathways fire up in response to visual erotica between men and women. There was another study conducted on the neural responses to stimuli in female typical women, that is XX chromosomes, and then CAIS women, who have a Y chromosome, so they have androgen insensitivity syndrome, and men. And what is very interesting about this study is that it demonstrates that, as expected, men showed greater amygdala activation to certain kinds of images in media, whereas both the female typical and the woman with androgen insensitivity syndrome, that is, woman with a Y chromosome, still showed less neural responses. And the researchers concluded that the Y chromosome alone does not determine male typical brain responses to stimuli. Also, I forgot to mention this, and the study reminded me, there's a concept known as sexual concordance within science. So it's essentially the degree of alignment between a person's physiological arousal and their subjective mental experience. Women tend to experience lower concordance, that is, there is lower alignment between their physical arousal and their mental state of thinking that they are turned on or not turned on, and men experience higher concordance. So men are more mentally aware of their physiological state, whereas women tend to be less aware. So for example, within some studies that I'm not mentioning in this just because I don't feel like they're relevant, women would subjectively report, no, I'm not aroused. But then when they would look at the objective measurements, they would see that physiologically the women were indeed aroused. So the relevance of that to this study is that men in this study exhibited higher concordance between reporting and brain responses, whereas women exhibited lower concordance. And the researchers highlight that the women with androgen insensitivity syndrome were socialized and raised as women, and therefore their brain responses were likely shaped by gender dynamics rather than biology alone. And that's demonstrated by the fact that they still exhibited lower concordance and still exhibited less response in the brain in spite of the fact that they had a Y chromosome and typical testosterone levels. There's a couple other studies in here, but I just wanted to go over a few of them. And another thing I want to address, I'm not sure if he mentioned this in the video or I saw it in the narrative review that he cited, but there's also a common narrative like, oh, men biologically have more testosterone, so that's why they're more, they have more desire. This is just wrong. It's not wrong, it's just disingenuous, like the framing of it, because testosterone and hormones aren't the primary determinant of libido, not always. Because if it was, we would observe a consistent and direct correlation between testosterone concentration levels and desire, but that's not the case. And so I cited some studies in here that demonstrate this and how other things influence desire or self-pleasuring frequencies, if you know what I'm referring to. And they basically just show that testosterone isn't the sole reliable biomarker of desire. Now, this is not to say it doesn't play a role in sexual functioning. Of course it does. I'm not saying it doesn't play a role in intercourse and desire and so forth. It does. But libido isn't hormonally deterministic. It is holistically constructed. It is an interplay of elements. That's the very reason why, for example, there's cases in which some people go through testosterone therapy, including women, and it doesn't fix anything for their libido. So if testosterone was the sole determinant, the most reliable biomarker, then we would see a causal relation. We would see a cause-effect relation, but we don't always see that as the case. So it's more correlational. Not to mention, we can agree that there exist women out there who have a higher libido than men. It's just libido varies from person to person, how they've been brought up. For example, some people who go through more trauma can be or exhibit more hypersexuality in both men and women. There's lots of things that can influence this. I also go through the evolution myth in my article, and I also talk about the issue of suppressing female desire and reinforcing this conventional wisdom that women are less interested in sex than men. It has resulted in things like the genital mutilation of women throughout history to de-incentivize women from having sex. There's things like vaginismus, which is a medical condition where the muscles down there involuntarily contract upon trying to have intercourse, and this is particularly prominent within regions that are more like religious or conservative. And the reason why is because sex is stigmatized and female desire is postured as something evil or wrong. And so what ends up happening is these women end up developing a psychological complex. They now start to have an anxiety associated with intercourse, even if they're married, and it becomes painful for them. They can't do it with their husband, they can't do it with their partner, because they believe it's something wrong, merely because they were indoctrinated to hate and believe that this isn't normal for them. Not to mention the suppression of like female sexuality has always served some kind of political or patriarchal role of controlling women and their expression in these respects. So take for example within the Judeo-Christian tradition, the foundational belief is that the fall of humanity began with the temptation of Eve, and that is what marked female desire as the original sin. And this kind of narrative persisted for centuries and centuries. Women in the medieval world were associated with the devil, they were labeled as temptresses and witches. Even the ancient Greeks believed that women were so lustful that they should just stay at home and that they were meant to just do worship to the gods because they thought women were so sexual and unrestrained. The way that you think men are sexual and unrestrained, that is what the Greeks thought of women. There's also like historical figures like Queen Kahina or Cleopatra who were often written off with like the label of witchiness because they were merely women demonized not only for their political influence but their sexual autonomy. In Puritan America, sexually expressive women were accused of witchcraft and executed. In ancient Bedouin societies, female infants were buried alive to prevent eventual dishonor. And even amongst one of the greatest scholars in philosophy, Aristotle believed that female sexuality was excessive and in need of control. There are literal philosophical scholars expressing this idea that women are too sexual, they're too lustful, and Aristotle framed men as the rational ones and women as erratic and sexually volatile, and therefore they needed to be controlled. Even Galen and Hippocrates extended these ideologies. And these examples are only to name a few. And Ali Dawah, I want you to take what I've just told you, the fact that this has persisted throughout history, the subjugation and suppression of female sexuality, how prevalent and how persistent it was throughout history, and you genuinely want to tell me women aren't as sexual as men or don't have the capability to be as sexual as men. It's ridiculous. Why would men be so consumed with controlling women to such an extent if it was not the case they didn't experience these desires, these impulses, this lust? And considering this, who is to say that this kind of historical condemnation has not shaped the way that women experience and express desire today, the way that you understand women today? Most women are socialized to associate this kind of pleasure with guilt and shame, no matter whether it's with their husband or in private. A lustful appetite can easily be caged by bars as rigid as shame, murder, and condemnation. I personally argue that if women were afforded the same sexual validation and quality within their sexual experiences as men, we would see a drastically different picture of reported desire. And honestly, I think we already are starting to see that difference within contemporary Western societies, which are more sexually liberated, in comparison to Eastern societies that condemn and repress female sexuality. Anyways, I talk about this a lot more in depth, but the narrative that you are propagating is wrong, it is disingenuous, and it is harmful. There is no conclusive, keyword conclusive, scientific evidence that men are inherently more sexual than women. There's no genetic law, there's no hormone constant, and there's no neurological structure that reaffirms this myth. What there is instead is a long and intricate history of suppression and subjugation, a history that has pathologized female pleasure and sexuality, a history that has rewritten desire itself to serve the convenience or lack thereof of male dominance. What you interpret as less female libido is not a lack, it's a response to violence, a response to shame, a response to exclusion, a response to indoctrination. Women are not less sexual, they're less safe to be sexual. Human libido is reactive, it's flexible, it's incredibly sensitive to context. It varies from individual to individual, contingent upon their upbringing, their environment, their mental health, their hormones, and their sex. None of these things are mutually exclusive. They each play a significant role in facilitating arousal. And this weaponization of sexuality has led to the mutilation of female reproductive organs, sexual trauma, marital rape, medical misdiagnosis because female reproductive health is widely understudied and misunderstood, as demonstrated by these studies, and cultural erasure. And for men, it's distorted the meaning of masculinity, equating it with sexual dominance and unchecked sexual behaviors. This idea that it's okay to be this lustful, to be this undisciplined. It's imposed performance as the centerpiece of male identity. And contrary to what we believe or what you might believe, this myth doesn't serve men. This idea that men are more sexual, this idea that men are more visual, they're more lustful, they're more unrestrained, they can't help themselves. It doesn't serve you. It doesn't help you. It dehumanizes you. It makes you seem like you're not a moral agent who is capable of governing themselves, of governing their impulses, and you are. You are not an animal, Ali Dawah. You are not a barbarian. That is the point that I'm making here. And you are capable of so much more. But you don't want to come to terms with that because you want to to live within the comfort of your echo chamber. You want to live within the comfort of reinforcing your behaviors rather than taking accountability and moving towards change. You don't want to move towards a more actualized and higher form within your relationship. You don't want to strengthen that bond with your wife. You want to justify your behaviors. You want to justify your thoughts. Not only is that not good for your relationship, is it not good for other women and men, but it's not good for you. And again, to clarify, so nobody takes my words out of context, this is not to say that women are more sexual than men or the inverse, because I would be no different than Ali Dawah if that's what I was doing. The point here is that human sexuality is not a gendered hierarchy, it is a spectrum. The data varies, the studies conflict, and that very inconsistency is what makes one thing clear. There is no fixed truth to be found in the idea that one sex desires more than the other. And although I couldn't go into everything from my article, I hope that summarizes why I am so frustrated with this idea and why you see me harp on you for it so much. Anyways, I apologize for my passion towards the end of this video. I'm starting to lose my voice a bit, but thank you guys for watching. If you watched to its entirety, even if you disagree with me, I appreciate you fully listening to my position, whoever you are. Even if you're Ali Dawah, I genuinely appreciate it. That is one of the most good faith things you could ever do, is truly trying to understand someone's perspective, even if you might not agree with it. Keep in mind, I'm not currently monetized, so if you want to support me, please go subscribe to my Substack. I also have subscriptions on my TikTok and my Instagram if you want to support me there. And if you don't want to do those things and you would rather donate to me directly, I also have a buy me a coffee. And if you don't want to support in those ways, or you can't, I also just appreciate comments. I appreciate engagement, reposting, and watching my videos in their entirety so I can get the watch hours. I'll see you guys in my next video, which will be the Men Are Not Wallets and Women Are Not Prizes, where I give what I believe to be the structure and framework of what an actualized and good relationship looks like. What it means to truly love someone and not reduce them to money, to not reduce them to prizes, to something sexual, and most of all, to not reduce your relationship to something transactional. To achieve something higher within your love and within your relationships. And not only that, but within yourself. I'm really, really excited for that video. Okay, bye.